We have lost our confidence in property rights. The government really owns the property. They own us when they invented the income tax. The income tax is based on the assumption, even if it's a low percentage, the assumption is the government owns all your income and the government will permit you to keep a certain percentage under certain conditions. And we jump through all the hoops. So it's the principle of the government ownership, you know, of our income. But once we succumb to the regulatory agencies of the federal government, as well as many local governments too, that our land isn't our land anymore. Our land is we have the liabilities of the land, we pay the rent, but if anything goes wrong, it's our fault. But if we want to use it, how many permits do you have to have? You know, it's just so out of control. And we have a federal register that continues to grow. People talk about it a little bit, but it always grows by the tens of thousands of pages. I don't know if any one individual could possibly understand what's in the federal register. But there's one promise that I'll make. I will not expand the size of the federal register. I will shrink the size of the federal register. Besides, the executive branch doesn't have constitutional authority to write regulations. Those are laws, and they're very, very complex, and it's the Congress's fault. It's our fault for allowing our members of Congress to default and allow the courts in the executive branch to write law. Only the Congress is supposed to write law. And the president should not be allowed to make use of what they call the signing statements. Oh, I'll sign this bill, but about 2/3 of it I don't like, so I'm not going to pay any attention to that. So he signs a statement like a line item veto. I have no intention on having line item vetoes or signing these statements. Also, a president has no authority to write executive orders. We've heard this president say, well, they're not moving fast enough along on some of these environmental issues. I'll just write an executive order. You know, this is not part of the system, and yet the complacency is getting smaller. People are waking up. I think we can say we've had enough of this. We want our freedoms back. In an age that we live in, and especially this last 12 years, especially since 9/11. 9/11 was a disaster. It was a disastrous day for us, and everybody understands that. But it was also an opening for people who wanted to do things they've been trying to do for a long time. For instance, the whole issue of Iraq was talked about and planned many, many years before 9/11. But they saw this as an opportunity. The first speech I gave on Iraq was in 1998, because that is when they said our policy in the United States now is to have regime change. So I was speaking out then, but after 9/11, you know, they concentrated too much on going into countries that had nothing to do with 9/11, occupying these countries while ignoring the people that I voted for to go after was the Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. But it took us 10 years to find him, and yet we went and occupied all these countries. We lost 8,500 Americans, 40-some thousand of severe injuries, hundreds of thousands of veterans today who are looking for help for post-traumatic stress syndrome and brain injuries, and the facilities aren't available. And we don't even know why we're there. This is why the military support my candidacy, because they know that the wars over there are not good wars at all. A young man asked me earlier today, he says, well, when would you be able to bring the troops home? And I said, well, I've been asked that question before. My answer is, as soon as I can send the ships. And they'll come up with all kinds of excuses, but I say, we just marched in, we can just march home. But we're not at war. We've been in police actions, and it's not called war anymore. It's called kinetic military action. So as long as it's kinetic military action, we don't have to worry too much about it. So, but we need, of course, an overhaul in the foreign policy. They'd like to paint us as not caring about the world, but the founders were very explicit about foreign policy. They wanted a foreign policy of friendship and trade with people. Haven't we been a lot better off with the Chinese and the Vietnamese now that we've been trading with them rather than killing each other? I was drafted in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it expanded, and that decade was terrible. It took another 10 years to get out of there, and I mean, no Americans want to be defeated and lose a war. But we lost the war. We came home. It was a loss. And we have to learn our lessons from this. And when McNamara wrote his memoirs, McNamara orchestrated the whole war. But he was somewhat subdued before he died. He wrote this memoir. And one of the reporters asked him, he says, does that mean you want to apologize? And he said something rather unique. He said, what good is an apology? He says, the only thing that counts is that if you recognize your mistakes and change your policies. That is what we have to do. But the French and the Americans were in Vietnam for a long, long time. A lot of people died, probably, of course, we lost 60,000, and there were probably 1 million Vietnamese that died. And just think, now the fact that we were there was to stop a domino effect of communism. And we left, and there was no domino effect. It looks like the domino happens to be the spread of capitalism to the Far East. I mean, the Chinese are now our bankers, and we're beholden to them. But we trade with Vietnam, we travel back and forth, we invest over there and they come over here. Just think how much more was achieved in peace than was achieved in war. And I don't understand. But that's exactly what the founders talked about. Others want us to be around the world because of this mystical thought that it's American exceptionalism. I think America is an exceptional nation, but this has been hanging around for a long time, that we have an exceptional system. We have the perfect political system, and therefore we have this moral, evangelical obligation to spread our perfect system to the world and teach them to be good Democrats and have elections and all these. Of course, we go over there, we invade them, we fight wars, we set up a government, they have an election, and they elect the wrong people, so we have to throw them out. But we've been doing that for a long time. But the exceptionalism of our country, we can restore that. That means we have to have a free and prosperous country. We have to, once again, really protect our civil liberties, and we have to have a more peaceful approach to the world. If we set a good example and we're free and prosperous, you know, it just may be that somebody else might say, well, that is a good example. Maybe they would want to emulate us. Wouldn't that be so much better than us trying to force it down their throat with a bunch of guns? But you know, after 9/11, of course, the one plan was that they had the opportunity to pass an act that they've been trying to pass for quite a few years. Most people know it as the Patriot Act. when I quizzed one of my fellow members about why he was voting for it, he said, how can I vote against the Patriot Act under these circumstances? It was a couple weeks after 9/11. He said, I could never explain that to my people back home. I said, but that's your job. Go home and explain it to them. But one thing for sure is if you look at a bill written in Congress and you see a title to it, make the immediate assumption it's going to do exactly the opposite of what the title says. Now, if they'd have been more honest and said this is repeal the Fourth Amendment bill, they wouldn't have been able to vote for it, and these things wouldn't get passed. But that is essentially what it's done. This has introduced the whole notions about how they treat us at the airports, part of the Patriot Act attitude. No reasons for search warrants, no reason for probable cause, just because, oh, we're going to make you safe. They're working on the assumption that we will always be cowed into believing that we're only going to be safe if we turn all the responsibility over to the government and give up our civil liberties. It's wrong. You never have to sacrifice your liberties for security. The president approximately 1 year ago sent somebody over to the Senate to testify and announced a new policy. The new policy was that even if you're an American citizen, the president has the authority to assassinate him without charges and without a trial because he's a bad person. Well, I would say he's a suspect and maybe is a bad person, but didn't Adolf Eichmann get a trial? Israel gave him a trial, and he was prosecuted and was killed. Timothy McVeigh was given a trial. But the bad people are supposed to be given trials so that we're always protected no matter what charges are made against us. So this is a very dangerous thing to do. But the president proved that he was the king because he's already assassinated 3 Americans to test the waters. So you say, well, that's only 3. That's only 3. But it's the precedent that counts. If it's set up that way, when chaos comes, which it can come, we want to know whether we're going to have any protections by the rule of law, and right now it's fading away from us, and that's what we have to be alarmed about and change. But the Congress didn't do much better. They delivered to the president in December, and he signed it on Happy New Year, first day of January. He signs the National Defense Authorization Act. Now here's a bill that repealed posse comitatus, which prohibits the military getting involved in civil law. But not only do they allow the Army now to get involved and arrest people, the Army can arrest an American, and once again, American suspect, because he's with even those considered associated with certain elements, just associated. And no charge is made that they can be arrested by the military, denied legal counsel, put in prison indefinitely. This